Okay, we will go ahead and start recording. We did have a slight change in program tonight, and I will be teaching instead of Amy. She's going to come in later, probably in November, and teach on insects. So you've got me again tonight. And we're going to talk about herbaceous landscape plants because I'm much better with this than I am with insects. So essentially we have herbaceous plants and we have woody plants. And so we're going to learn the distinctions tonight and some of the definitions of what makes those distinctions between those plants. It's based on the life cycle, but a herbaceous plant will tend to be, it's non-woody. I mean, so herbaceous means it's kind of foliage, fleshy. It's not going to turn into a wood like a tree or a shrub or something like that. So okay, so as I said, the herbaceous can be fleshy, soft, or succulent stem plants, and they are also classified as annuals, perennials, or biennials, and we're going to go over that in just a minute. And then we have our woody perennials, which we're going to have a session on woody ornamentals later on. So we'll talk about them by themselves. But woody perennials are largely trees and shrubs, anything that has a hard stem, a trunk, and woody stems rather than the fleshy herbaceous stems. So our annuals are going to complete their life cycle in one season of growth. We've learned that through botany. So they provide their color and their interest in one season. Okay, and a lot of what we consider annuals are perennials in southern climates. And we had some questions about our climate zones, and we are in zones 7A to B to 8. So 7A, B, all the way down to 8, down around Memphis, where it starts going into Arkansas and then Mississippi and all that is in zone 8. So basically you start at the top with 1 and then you work your way down. The higher the number, the warmer the climate is going to be. So like in Missouri, where I came from, it was like a 5 to 6. And I think it's changed to full 6. So we are a little bit different. So what you can expect is that things that will grow fine in the winter in zone 5 probably wouldn't make it through our summers. That would be the problem, would be the heat. And so you do need to pay attention on those tags when it says zoned, for like 5 to 8 or whatever, then you know that we are within that zone where they're going to survive. But there might be some perennials that are short-lived in our environment. I mean, Tennessee is just kind of crazy. Would you mind? Okay. Yeah, the sun just went down and blinded me. So anyway, so most of our annuals are perennials in a warmer climate. So petunias, snapdragons, bedding plant vinca, all of those reproduce by seed. So they may seem like they're perennials because they're coming back from seed each year. Okay, but perennials are like I think tonight I wasn't ready to teach. Our perennials are going to live for several years. They're like our black-eyed Susans, our dahlias, our irises, and things like that are going to come back each year. They usually they have a short bloom period, and then the tops will die back with that first freeze. You do a good cleanup of your garden, and then hopefully they'll come back the next year. So usually in our landscape, we're going to use a mix of annuals, perennials, and then we have biennials. Biennials have to be a little bit different. They are plants that need 2 growing seasons to complete their life cycle. So the first year that you plant it from seed, all you're going to see is the foliage. It's going to have a rosette of foliage come up. It will not produce a flower. It will not produce a seed. Now that foliage will die back to the ground. And then the second year that it comes up, it has the foliage, and then it will flower, and then it will go to seed. So every second year that plant has a flower and a seed. So foxglove, sweet William, money plant, Dame's rocket, evening primrose, those would all be biennials. So if you buy those in the store, like if you buy some foxglove that is in bloom, they're in their second year. So unless they come back from seed, they're not going to come back that next year. Okay, or you might see the rosette come up and no bloom, you know, or something strange like that. But once they become established, you don't really realize that they're biennials because, you know, some plant is always in its second phase. So you'll have some blooms from something going on. So that's annuals, perennials, and biennials. We also have different types of plants. Grasses are considered herbaceous plants. And we do have both annual and perennial ornamental grasses for Tennessee. I like to use the ornamental grasses a lot. You can get anything from the dwarf ones to the real tall, big. They're good for screens. They're good for adding some aesthetic value. We've got a few out here in our landscape bed. I like using the native switch grasses. They are, because they survive and they do a little bit better in all different types of soil, especially dry soil. Now, when we planted out here, we were planting basically in dirt. I won't even call it soil. It was dirt that was brought to us. And then the concrete, I mean, remains of concrete and rocks. And I'm so surprised that that is still out there, that those plants are still growing, because I didn't give it any hope when we first planted all of that stuff. And that was about 2014, 2015. Looking at Betty back here. It was around that time that we planted all that. So the plants have done fairly well. We've lost a few trees along the way, but we're going to replace those. But anyway, don't think that you have to just stick to one type of plant in your landscape. You want to use a good mix, have a good diversity, something that has some kind of characteristics, seasonal characteristics throughout the year. I like to use the grasses, the plumes. You can get them in different colors and shapes and such like that. And they just make good flower arrangements. You can dry them out, use them for flower arrangements and things like that. But you leave them up until spring. A lot of people like to cut them down at this time of the year just because they're done looking at them. But really, they carry a lot of winter interest, and they actually provide homes for wildlife and such like that. So, or cover, like when the hummingbirds are moving through, they might use that grass as a place to hide as they're, you know, migrating north or migrating south. So, but our grass selections have become better at the garden centers and nurseries and such like that. Usually don't plant ornamental grasses from seed. They usually buy them in a 4-inch or a 1-gallon pot and such like that, and have them already, make sure they've already germinated and come up. We do try to encourage our farmers to do native wildlife plantings and such. And they've had a lot of trouble with the seed germinating and taking and everything. So we've let the fescue is actually an exotic grass. Fescue and Bermuda both, which we consider our lawn grass, was brought over from Europe, and our natural prairie grasses were pretty much destroyed because everybody wanted this nice little fescue lawn and all that. So that's how it changed over time, is our native grasses kind of got booted out for this, you know, perfect lawn that everybody wants in front of their house. So, but
this spring, Austin P have a sale
yes,
of native plants, trees and plants,
yes.
and they were ridiculously cheap.
Okay, yes. We have a class member mentioning that Austin P has a sale every spring, and on the native grasses and trees and such. We'll just have to watch. I'll let y'all know when those are coming up. But our own plant sale, our Master Gardener plant sale, is coming up this Saturday. And it will be at right in front of the public library here in Montgomery County. And so get there early if you want to get plants, because they sell out quick. And there'll be all kinds of plants. It's Master Gardeners usually dig the plants and repot them and then resell them down at the sale. So there'll be a little bit of everything. Probably not a lot of vegetables, I don't think. Not this time of the year. I usually try to squeeze some vegetables in there for spring, but just perennials, trees. It is Saturday and it starts at 8. And they will be gone by 10, 11 at the latest. because they sell out that quick. So, and so if you want to go to that, be there Saturday morning. Okay, we also use ground covers in our landscapes. I kind of take this and try to tie it in with a little bit of landscape design. As we think of our rooms, we think of our outdoor rooms. We have a ceiling, which can be our sky. It can be a canopy of a tree. It can be an open area, our floors. We can use grass for the covering. We can use ground covers. And then we use our trees and shrubs and different types of plants as our walls. And so I think of it as creating outdoor rooms, outdoor spaces that you can easily walk through. And kind of, in my mind, I think about what nature is already put out there. You know, how do I want to design my landscape? I want it to look natural. I want it to have a lot of curving lines, not a lot of sharp edges and sidewalks and things like that. I just want more of a natural look. And so that's what I try to teach, is to look at what's going on naturally around you and create those outdoor rooms. Tropical plants, I like using tropical plants. When we go down for summer celebration in Jackson, you guys will have to go there to that. They use a lot of tropical plants, elephant ears, and all kinds of different things. And what they do is they take and they sink the pots into the ground, pull the soil around them and keep them watered all summer, keep them outside. And then when about this time of the year, they'll be pulling those pots back up, cleaning them up and putting them in the greenhouse for the winter. So tropicals, it's a good addition to your garden. Just remember, you got to take them in. You know, we do have some hardy banana trees, and I've seen that change just in 24 years that I've been in Tennessee. Seemed like when I first moved here, I lost like my banana tree plants. I lost my elephant ears, but they were all used to Missouri soil too. So I lost a lot of plants that I tried to drag with me. But you know, the environment was just that much of a change that it killed them off. And it also depends on our winters. Sometimes we'll have a really mild winter, and sometimes it'll be fairly warm, and you won't get a really hard freeze. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a help here last year.
And what kind?
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't dig them up anymore. I'll cut them back and cover them with mulch, and yeah. So our environment is changing, our climate is changing, it seems. And then like with these things, like with the tropicals, you know, there are tender tropicals, and then there are some that would still be kind of hardy, borderline in our area, but you probably do have to provide some protection for them, at least mulch them. But they can add, you know, different characteristics, that lushness, the bold effects in many gardens. And as I said, they can be overwintered in the home or in a greenhouse, some other type of protective structure. But if you have a small area that you're trying to garden, I mean, you have a little patio or something like that, the tropicals would be good. It'd be easy to move them in and out. And you can always get the pots, and then they've got little things that sit underneath the bottom of them that got wheels on them. And then you just wheel them things around everywhere. You can turn them to meet the sun and all that stuff. So, okay, so choosing your plants that are appropriate to your region. We should make sure that our plants are zoned for Tennessee, and the soils are very important because our soil type changes drastically from one end of Tennessee to the other. So, you know, like on the Highland Rim, you're going to see more of an alkaline soil, whereas here you're going to see a clay, little bit more on the acidic side. Not too bad, because a lot of our fields, or what you're seeing where houses are now, were soybean fields for years, and on soybean fields they're limed intensively, and so that's going to make them more alkaline. And so when I get the question from, you know, everybody that's moving to Tennessee these days, you know, I tell them they've got to take a soil test, and they've got to think about where they're living. I mean, if it's a new subdivision, pretty much all your soil has been removed. It may have been put back, but it's been compacted. And so you've got a compacted layer, and then you've got that soil, you know, that's been laid back on top. And so adding compost as you can, you know, when you overseed, put some compost in there with it. And, just try to increase that organic matter in your soil is all you can do, is try to bring it back to life. And that's hard to do if you've got, a large lot that's just mainly lawn area. But you can also reduce your turf areas, plant more trees, make ornamental beds, gardens, and things like that. And I kind of get away from the turf. But I don't like turf. Never did. It's just kind of boring and it takes a lot to manage it. If you see somebody with a picture perfect green lawn, you know how many chemicals have been used on it. And that, mine, if it's green and it's growing, it's fine. I just don't like the seed heads popping up everywhere. So we are 7A. Let me go ahead and go to the picture. I probably needed to update that. Okay, so we are actually 7A, 7B, and then we go down into 8 as we get down toward Memphis and such, and Chattanooga. But there are some pockets, of 6B up by Cookville, because you get more in the mountainous areas. And so the climate changes a little bit as you go to the east. So, and we also just have to kind of look and think about, where you're at and look at the weather, the temperatures. I know Mr. Stewart there has the almanac. So the almanac is predicting a hard winter for us, is what I've heard from everybody.
Reasonably cold, that's what they said.
Unreasonably cold. Okay, so we may have a harsh winter. And so some of those things that we've gotten used to leaving out may have some winter damage to them, like our elephant ears or dahlias, would be a tender annual, things like that, or tender perennial. So we may have to mulch your plants, do a good cleanup, things like that, and just watch what the weather's doing. Read your almanac, look at those predictions for the future. And if you've got fig trees or any of these sensitive plants, you may need to wrap them or do something to kind of protect them from the harsh winters. So,
Karla, I have a question.
okay.
Could you speak on succulents?
On succulents, like houseplants?
Outdoor succulents.
Outdoor succulents?
Yeah, the sedums.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think, well, what did you want to know about them, I guess?
Because they're pretty hardy, right?
Yes, they are. We like to use the sedums in rock gardens, and I mean, they'll grow just about anywhere, dry or wet. But there's
And then
just
they
different
come back.
varieties of sedum, hens and chickens, things like that you could plant. Yes.
And they go dormant in the winter, is that correct?
Yes, they will go dormant in the winter. So they are perennials.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let's look a little bit about site selection. And so when you're choosing sites for plants or plants for sites, keep in mind the variation of the light categories. Okay, some plants like a low light area, some like full sunlight, some like a mottled sun, and we'll go over that in just a minute. But you need to choose the plant for the environment that you have. Okay, so if you have a full sun environment, you're going to, select plants that are drought tolerant, can take the heat, can take the sun, and can take a little drought even. If you have shaded area, of course, you're going to choose plants for shade and so on and so forth. So make sure you do a little research on the plants and make sure that you're putting them in the environment that they like to be in. So identify problem areas. Sometimes you may have drainage issues or hard pans. Hard pans is just what I was talking about with development, where they've done a lot of construction and heavy equipment and things like that have been piled up around everything. And so they create a hard pan and then they put soil on top of that, but you've still got that hard pan layer. Now, in some areas, we just naturally have a hard pan. Sango area is basically an outcrop of limestone rock. And so in some areas of Sango, you're lucky to dig down 6 inches. So if you live in the Sango area and you're having trouble growing trees and shrubs and things like that need a deep rooted environment, that might be why they can't get down into the soil deep enough to be able to survive. And then when a wind comes along, that knocks them over really easy. So if they don't have that depth in soil, they'll try to grow outwards, but that's not very stable. They can still topple over easily because of that hard pan. So, but anyway, while you're looking at your site selection, you're gonna look at the lighting, look at the environment to meet the needs of the plant, identify areas such as your drainage issues, your hard pans. You're gonna locate utilities both above and below ground. And you can do the 811, call before you dig. Make sure you do that before you start in digging, because some of these utility lines are just inches below the soil and you don't know it. Your cable lines, your electric lines. You want to know where your sewer lines are, where your septic is, because you do not want to plant on top of your septic, your lines there, or over the tank, or they may have to get in and do maintenance where that tank opening is. So be sure to locate those types of areas and just understand the growing site and the plant material that you're going to need. And many times that's trial and error. You're just going to have to see what grows there. It may not make it, may survive fine. So our sunlight, if you see a plant that says it needs full sun, that means that it needs at least 6 hours of full sunlight per day to thrive and to flourish. Okay, if it gets less than that, it's not going to do well. It's probably going to be really kind of light colored. It won't be as green as it's supposed to be. It might be kind of leggy, and it might be leaning toward where the sun is coming. So when it says full sun, that's 6 hours or more of direct sunlight is required. Partial sun, partial shade, those terms are kind of used interchangeably. About 3 to 6 hours of sun is needed for those type of plants. When it says partial sun or partial shade, like a hydrangea, hydrangeas like that sun in the morning that dries them off really quickly, and then they like the shade in the afternoon because they do not like the heat in the afternoon. They will just kind of melt and that. So they'll tell you about it. So, and then you have dappled sun. That's like kind of walking through the woods, and you've got those streams of light that are coming through and somewhat hitting the ground, but it's not 3 to 6 hours of direct sunlight a day. It's going to have less than that. So that would be your ferns, a lot of your just shade loving native plants, that native woodland type plants. Now, full shade, if you have an area that gets less than 3 hours of direct sunlight, then you might have a problem growing anything besides mushrooms in this area. So if you're wanting to grow plants and you have less than 3 hours of direct sunlight, you may want to think about removing some trees or doing some pruning to open that up to where you can grow some other plants underneath them. Just kind of depends on what your goal is for your landscape. Do you want to keep that shaded wooded environment, or do you want to open it up a little bit and have some of these flowering plants on the understory? So your light exposure on the site is going to dictate the plants that can be used. Okay, so most annuals and perennials are going to require full sun to realize their flowering potential, especially flowering and fruiting. So, but you do have annuals, perennials, and biennials that will do better in shaded areas. So it's just a matter of doing that research and seeing what the plant requires and what type of environment that you have available. So sun-loving plants need 6 hours or more. If those have less light than that, they're going to be poor flowering, stretchy, leggy growth, weak stems. And of course, your shade plants, you put them out in the full sun, they're going to suffer also. They'll get burned up. So, on soil and bed preparation, I like to recommend that you measure out your area that you're wanting to plant. Like maybe you're doing a foundation planting for the first time. Measure out the area, and then you want to get enough soil to cover that area about 3 inches thick with organic matter, with compost. And then you're going to till that into the native soil. And then each year you'll just keep adding to that by using mulch, and by, like, every time you plant something, like if you're using annuals, What I like to do is get a good potting mix, like a BMX mix or something like that, that has extra nutrients in it and even mycorrhiza. And so when I put my little annuals in there, I'll put a scoop of good soil, I'll kind of mix it in with the parent soil, and I'll plant. And that really gives them a boost. And then that mycorrhiza takes hold in the soil and it stays there. Okay. And then it just helps to increase the fungal activity or the microorganism activity in the soil. So yes.
Can you emphasize on that product?
Okay, BMX is just one brand name. I used to get it, it was called BMX with mycorrhiza.
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 Yeah.
Mycorrhiza is just it's a fungus that attaches to the roots of plants, and it helps them uptake the water and the nutrients, but it also helps them interact with other plants around them.
Okay.
So like if you think of the forest, the trees, their roots don't just remain the same. This tree's roots and that tree roots, they're going to commingle at some point. And so the mycorrhiza gets in there on those roots. And like if this tree over here gets sick, these trees over here will start actually feeding sugars and water to that sick tree to try to help it out.
Okay.
And so the mycorrhiza, is just natural in a forested location, but it's not normally there in our lawns, in our environments, because it's been taken away.
Okay.
So it's got to be added back to it. So. Okay. Okay. But we do like a well-drained soil, a high in organic matter. Like I said, it's Tennessee. We've got a lot of clay and rocks. And so you've just got to add to what you've got and build up. And just make a happy place for the roots to grow, basically. Oops. Okay, so organic matter in the soil. Okay, you can do your own compost piles, or you can buy compost. We have an excellent company down Highway 12. It's about our only big compost company. It's called The Compost Company off Highway 12 towards Cheatham County, Ashland City. And you can buy it bagged or you can buy it in bulk. Really good stuff. Really good stuff. Okay, because they work with restaurants and schools and things like that out of the Nashville area. And so they take their byproducts and they make that into a compost for us to use in our gardens. I wish we had something like that in Clarksville, but I really do. Anybody's got any influence, When?
Oh,
There's-
our household did like this summer, spring. Only $500 for 6 cubic yards.
Oh, from the compost company? Oh, okay. Okay.
They take a lot of the byproduct from tobacco.
Mm.
They take the tobacco stems, whatever.
Yeah.
Tests to make sure none of the tobacco.
Okay.
Very long, it's a lot better.
Well, that's good. Nicotine is actually used as a insecticide. So nicotine that's in the stalks could still be all right, but you may have some chemicals you're picking up. So that'd be the only thing I'd be worried about with tobacco stalks and such. No.
When I talked to them, they specifically made sure that stuff survives the compost process.
Okay.
They, I guess they sold a bunch of farmers field.
Okay.
And stuff.
Mhm.
That's the farmers, like small person.
Yeah.
Small person.
Mhm. Yes.
Stopped using.
Yes. Yes. We've had a lot of problems with Grazon. And Grazon is it's a grass killer. It will kill certain types of grasses, but not your long grass. And it also kills some broadleaf weeds. And so farmers do use it on their fields, and then to control the weeds in the hay, then they harvest the hay, and then you use the hay or the straw or the manure in your garden, and those chemicals are not broken down. And they would have to test for that to make sure that it's not in the compost. So, just by me going out and looking at a garden, I can tell. I've looked at one this year. Gentleman used the Grazon on his whole landscape. His trees, his shrubs, his garden, everything was dying. And that, he was just mad, mad as a wet hornet at me for pointing it out that he had indeed killed his whole
I can
landscape.
still remember, as a fairly young child, a friend of ours had a farm, and his wife worked at Acton. So we would go and pick and whatever, and mother would can everything.
Yeah.
Or freeze it, and we'd give half back to Ellie, and we kept that.
Yeah.
Which worked out real well.
Yeah.
Because staff sergeants didn't make that much.
Yeah.
But I can still remember Ellie.
Yeah.
Every year after cutting the tobacco, he let the stalks pile up, and then they get scattered over the.
Yeah.
his
They usually put them
field.
back in the tobacco fields. So,
Well, he
yeah.
put it back in the back fields, or he put it out in the pastures that he was gonna hay the next year.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
none of it went to waste.
Yeah, none of it went to waste, but we have to be careful just to watch because there's a lot more chemicals and they have a longer
Well,
residual
this is
than what.
60 years ago.
Yeah. So
So
thing,
it
yeah,
wasn't
the
as much.
chemicals and the things have changed and we now know how long they carry over. I say there was some pretty bad stuff that was used back then. I mean, we went through DDT and, different things.
The bald eagles is a perfect example. I don't care if it was 60 years ago or not. They were worse back then than they are now. Because
And they didn't, I mean, and there
were
wasn't
innocents, you know,
enough
they're-
oversight on it to, be able to tell the farmers, for one, that they need to or needed to wear the protective clothing and not breathe these things in and wash your fruits and vegetables, wash your hands often, things like that. So yeah, it can stay in your system a long time. So the different chemicals. So we just want to be careful with that. So let's see. But I like to add the organic matter at the beginning and then just keep on adding as you go along, and that helps you build up your soil. And that's really the only way to garden in Tennessee is to build upwards. So when you get started, remove or kill any unnecessary vegetation. You can do that with hand removal or chemicals, something, herbicide that will kill everything. That would be my last choice. I'd probably just till it up and hand remove if you could. You can use a shovel, a spade, or if you have a large area, you might want to get a sod stripper. If you're pulling off some good grass that could be used somewhere else, you might want to get a sod stripper and just pull, just make up your own rolls of sod and move it. We did this at a church that I used to go to, and I'll show you that here in just a minute, because where I did the landscape design and I told them not to plant grass seed. They planted grass seed right up to the building and it was growing great. And the other seed that was out where we didn't really want it, it didn't grow at all. So it was backwards from what I had envisioned. So we took the soil and the grass that was up near the church and we moved it out to some areas where it was needed. But you can use solarization. At this time of the year, solarization does not work. Okay, well, maybe this week it would. Maybe this week it would.
At
Usually,
least for tomorrow.
yeah, through tomorrow. Yeah, but solarization is done with clear plastic. You have to leave that on, cover an area with clear plastic for about 4 to 6 weeks. The temperature needs to get above 130 degrees for that amount of time, and it will kill everything down to about 6 inches. And that's weed seeds, diseases, some insects. Now your insects, your beneficials especially, tend to just go down further in the soil. And then once you take that plastic off and you start working the soil, the worms and everything will start coming back up into it. So, but it's mainly for weed control. I like using a lot of just cardboard, newspaper, mulch, just making layers and layers before I plant anything. I don't like to throw away anything around the house. Somebody over here said that. So, now that I'm still unpacking boxes. And so my boxes, I get done unpacking, I take them around the house and I put them outside and I put a little bit of vegetation on them to hold them in place to start building up that church or whatever it is out there. I still got to bring y'all some. So, but And at this point, you should do a soil test, and we've already talked about how to do that. Just remember, you need to get a well-represented sample of the landscape area that you're going to be amending, and you need to know what you're going to plant. Okay, so because you can choose 4 crop codes per sample. So if you're doing a lawn, you would choose lawn. You could do garden, you could do fruit trees, you could do annuals or perennials, whatever you want, but you get 4 codes per sample. So you might as well get your money's worth. And you want to till the area up to about an 8-inch depth, remove any rocks, other debris, rake it out to where it's smooth, put your amendments on there, kind of till it in lightly again, and then go in and start planting your plants, or put the amendments in that's recommended from your soil test, then plant. Okay. Now, fall is the best time to be thinking about your trees and your shrubs, your woody plants, and a lot of your perennials. Your perennials, while you're cleaning up the beds right now, they can be dug up and divided and moved and planted in different areas. Just go ahead and move them, plant them to a different area, and get them in the ground now before we get that hard winter that's bound to be coming, because the persimmons even have spoons. So has anybody ever cut open a persimmon seed? Because you know what I'm talking about, the lure. Yeah, it's a spoon or a shovel means snow. A knife means ice. What's the other one? A fork. Yeah, something like that. A mix. Witchcraft. Now, the funnest part is trying to split that persimmon seed open. Now, I haven't hardly figured that part out, because they do not like to come apart. I've even soaked them for days and tried to, you think they'd pop open like a bean, and they don't. They're hard, but anyway. So some of the best amendments for clay soils are your pine bark, humus, composted leaf mold, manures, with that warning about the pesticides. Grass clippings, same thing. If you're treating your lawn for weeds, you're not going to want to put those grass clippings around your vegetable plants and your flowers, because they're going to have those residual herbicides in there. And Bermuda grass seed, yeah. So here is the area at our church where we used a sod stripper, and essentially it just rolls it up just like a piece of sod. I mean, you need some muscles to do this, and that sod is real heavy once you get that roll done. So we learned to do shorter lengths instead of going so long with it. But our volunteer there with the sod machine just kind of, once you get going, you get going, but I was picking those up and putting them in the bucket of the tractor, and I was like, these things are heavy. So, but it did work. They established fine, and then we built our landscape up in that area next to the church. It's just a sod stripper. It's a cutter.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It must be rented.
Yes, we rented this from Sunbelt Equipment, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've got a little, it's a long retaining wall along the driveway. And Dan put in blocks, and I have this place about this wide, and that's where I get the majority of the sun, and that's where I plant my tomatoes and my sunflowers and other things. And I decided I want to expand it out a little bit.
Okay.
So I need to get that sun.
Oh, okay. So, well, you just have to check on the, the cost, I mean, it may not be cost effective if you just got one strip like that. You may be able to kill it off and do it by hand. So, yeah.
It would be worth it than trying to take a flat shovel and.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. Just depends on how hard you want to work on it, I guess.
That's all I've got.
Yeah. True.
And many years ago, neighbor decided he wanted to plant 2 big trees. One of them were little bitty trees. They're back in his yard, almost up against ours.
Yep.
He said he wanted some privacy.
Yes.
They're huge silver rings now, and we can't put it in the backyard for anything much anymore.
Yeah, that does happen too. So. Another thing you want to do when you're doing your bed preparation is you might want to do a percolation test. And basically that's just digging a hole about 1 foot deep, a foot wide, just a round hole, and fill that hole up with water and see how long it takes it to drain. Okay, so if you fill it up with water and you go out in the morning and that hole is still pretty much full of water, you know you've got a poorly drained soil.
It says if the water does not drain in less than an hour, the drainage needs improvement. Does that mean some drainage? Or does that, you're not saying the whole thing needs to drain in an hour, correct?
If the water is not draining less than an hour. No, that doesn't,
Because
that's not me.
the soil guide said that
Yeah.
it needs to be gone in 24 hours.
Yes.
You'll
Yes.
see some after about 30 minutes.
So that's not an accurate statement. I'm sorry, I wasn't even reading my slides up there. So no, that's not an accurate statement. If it's, I
When they
mean,
come out to first,
you want it to,
put in a septic line.
yeah, true,
You gotta, you know,
true. So. Seeing if I had the next slide has it. No, one to spacing. But anyway, it usually, if it's drained within 6 to 8 hours, you know, you should be okay. That means your water's going to drain off in a fairly timely manner. If that's still sitting there 24 hours later and it's full, then you know that you've got it's not draining well. You're going to have to either do some work to plant in that area, or just simply select plants that grow in a wet, mucky type environment. You know, you can plant sycamore, river birch, different trees, willows, or other plants that like to have wet feet. Okay, especially if you have a large area. Because if it's not well drained, then you know your plants are just going to get root rot. You're going to have all kinds of problems. And if while you're digging that hole, if you will look at the soil and just look at the colors of it, okay? If you start seeing streaks of gray and even into blackish colored, you know, then you're going into like concrete, okay? And that is a very bad soil. With the gray streaks in it, it's going to be what they use to make pottery with, you know, things like that. And so it's going to be very hard to amend because you can't get it to break up. I mean, when you make a ribbon out of it, it just stays in that ribbon, and you try to mix in organic matter and it won't mix, it just sticks. So if you have that kind of clay, then you've got some big problems. And a lot of times we'll see that near river bottoms or just poorly drained areas. So if you ever come across that situation, you know, contact your extension agent. When come out and look at it, one, to see what's going on, if it's just a natural occurrence. Maybe you've got something going on with your lateral lines for your sewage system. You know, that can also cause the gray, black look to the soil. You know, just things like that, that something may not be right, but or we can recommend the different types of plants that you could plant in that area. Now, farmers will put in drain tiles and different things like that to handle that situation.
Real quick, Carl, does adding sand to that, wouldn't you, I mean, sand would actually solidify it?
Yes,
Right?
yes, correct. He was asking about sand. If you add sand to clay, you get bricks. And so it's just going to continue to, heave and expand and contract. And so rather than using sand, you want to use compost, composted organic matter, not sand. Okay, proper spacing of your plants is also important. If they're too close, you're going to have poor circulation, and this is going to lead to disease problems mainly. We want those plants to have that air movement so they can dry out quickly in the morning, and then you have less fungal leaf spot and bacterial spots and diseases. So, but they need that air movement to dry off, to get rid of the excess dew, the water, the humidity. But then if your plants are placed too far apart, then you're going to have open areas. And what did we talk about last week when you have open areas? What's weeds? Okay. So you want to plant them. Usually when you buy, a little 6-pack of flowers, it's going to give you a range, 6 to 8 inches or 8 to 10 inches apart. Again, depending on how much money you want to spend, you can plant them a little bit closer or a little bit further apart. I like to stagger my plants, not put them in straight lines. But rather than just doing bop, 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 right in front of each other, you do one line and then you go forward 8 to 10 inches and then you go in between. And then that way, when they fill in, they'll fill in that whole area, and then you get that 50-mile-per-hour look. You know, people that are driving by your house 50 mile an hour, they're gonna see that and say, wow, look at that. We just passed that. It's bright, it's pretty. Okay, so you will mass it.
So, which one only bring the rows a little closer, or you still leave the most?
I'm still going by the spacings that are recommended. Yeah, you can do them a little bit closer. But like I said, if you want a fully compact, you want that whole area covered, you're gonna put them a little bit closer together. If you want a little bit of space in between, you want your red mulch or your black mulch, you want that mulch to show, you know, and it's kind of an aesthetic thing, you know, so. But I like putting a mulch, and I like using plants as ground covers too. Like in this area, I would probably have some creeping Jenny in there somewhere that's going to cover and make a natural mulch. And I was so mad, my creeping Jenny that I moved died on me. I've got to find some more. So if anybody's got any creeping Jenny and they want to get rid of some sprigs, they can bring them to me. But I was so careful about bringing that from my other house. And so then anyway, maybe it just got tired of being moved around so much. But anyway, make sure that you do follow the spacing. Annuals, you know, like I said, it's not, I mean, it is important, especially if you're in the landscape business. I mean, you need to know your square footage, how many plants you're going to need to cover a whole area, like if you're bidding a job or something like that. So, and as a homeowner, you want to know how many plants you need when you go down to Lowe's to, or wherever, garden center, any garden center, doesn't have to be Lowe's. So, but anyway, just watch your spacing, pay attention to that, plant them closer together if you want, you know, that mass effect. Okay, so our ground covers can provide little brush strokes for the back, and also add some background color. And I don't know, I like to use them to, I do like to use them to outline a bed, but it is part of the whole composition. You have to think of it as an element or a contrast to what you've already planted. So your ground cover should complement the other plants that you're using. And maybe that ground cover will be something that will stay there permanently all year round, and your annuals will be gone, then your ground cover's there, you know, stays. So, and then you want to provide some vertical accent, like a background. And we talk about using tall plants such as Joe Pieweed, purple coneflower, or other types of coneflowers, foxglove, dill, ornamental grasses, but just pay attention to the times that they are blooming, so that you have something blooming from early spring into summer, into fall, right up until our first frost in the winter. And you can even
I
start.
muted you on my accident. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
Hello?
Hello? Where are you coming from? Can you all hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. Somebody must have muted themselves. Okay.
Yeah,
I got you. Okay, we're all good. Okay. So for cascading or weeping forms of plants, you might want to think about using perennial verbena, ornamental sweet potato vine, vinca vine. You may want to add rounded or shrubbery form like artemisia, rosemary, catnip, perennial salvias, sage. And don't be afraid to kind of mix it up. Use your edibles within the landscape, because you can put perennial flowers and you can put edible flowers together in the landscape. And, you know, it will be really pretty and it will have a function. Okay.
could you speak on ornamental sweet potato vines? Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Okay, on the ornamental sweet potato vines, okay, they are in the sweet potato family, of course, and they have just been bred for those characteristics in the leaves. They may have different shapes or colors and forms, but they do grow a potato at the base, and you can grow them in pots or you can grow them in the ground. And some people will eat them. I have tried them. They're not very tasty. I mean, they are edible, but they are a different variety than our edible plants. But you can't, I mean, I've overwintered them in containers before. In fact, I overwintered one so long that it got huge and it busted out of its container. And I was like, wow, I've got a sweet potato about this big, you know, I just hadn't paid attention to it. It was in a,
You got a whole sweet potato casserole.
yeah, that's when I tried eating it. It wasn't very good. It was not very tasty. So, but what other questions did you have? They usually need full sun. They can be kind of invasive, but you can keep them pruned back. You can also make cuttings of them and, put them in a little water and then, transplant them out to different areas. So
You grow them in a pot?
yes, you can grow them in containers. Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Anybody wants some, I have 3 planted. in
Okay.
front of my walkway, and I'm out there every week, keeping them off the porch and off the sidewalk.
Bring him next week.
Yeah, bring us some cuttings next week.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we've got a lady that has some here in the class, so, okay. Okay, and here's just some examples. We've got our ground covers, just different types of little things blooming. There's some of your sedum. The lady was asking about sedum before. Coming up in the spring with those little hyacinths. We've got some artemisia. I know that's coneflower. I forget what the one in the front is. It's not Joe Pye weed. I've forgotten what the one in front is. And then it looks like we've got some mint down on the bottom there. So planting dates. Are you guys ready for break yet? Do you need to get moving around? No? No? Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, in Tennessee, the average last frost date is April 15th. Now, how many of us, can you guess when our last frost dates have been like the last 3 years? May? Okay, so our climate is changing. I'm not saying, I'm not gonna go, Al Gore on you or anything, but I think that our climate is changing because we are seeing it stay warmer into the fall. We may not get that first freeze until well after October 15th, which is what's written down. And, so we may not see a freeze till November or even going into early December. And then we'll see the cold lasting until mid-May or even into June. And so that kind of changes our planting dates and all these guides that we have that say, you can plant your tomatoes on April 15th. Well, we know common sense tells us now, you don't really want to put them out on April 15th. Even if you cover them, the ground temperature has not warmed up enough for them to like it very well. Now, cool season plants are great. Go with your cool season plants in your garden and just wait for it to warm up before you put those warm season ones out.
One of the old sayings was that you started putting everything out by Good Friday.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, Mother's Day,
Early
you're
stuff
usually
you
good.
could Put out, your
Mhm.
leaf lettuce and stuff.
Yeah. Well, you can put that out pretty early here in Tennessee, and especially if you've got like the row covers, or if you've planted cover crops and you're planting within a cover crop. I mean, that also helps to warm the soil up, and you can plant a little bit earlier in areas where you've had your cover crop growing. So, okay. I'll say it. So your cold hardy annuals, you can plant in the spring and the fall, plant September through October. When they're planted early in the spring, they're going to be short-lived due to the heat stress. So right now is when you want to start putting out like your bulbs, your spring blooming bulbs. You can put out your cabbages, like your ornamental cabbage and kale, pansies. Snapdragons would do okay for a little while till the first freeze, but things like that you can plant at this time of the year, or you can plant in spring. But it's really better to put them out now and just let them overwinter. And then, you're one step ahead of your neighbors too, because you've got bulbs and you've got pansies that coming back to life early in the spring, that you've done the work this fall, and you get to reap the reward in the spring. So your warm season annuals plant Mid-April through June, again, we're starting to think about the changes in the environment and just watch what the weatherman has to say and what Mother Nature is going to do, and watch when you put out those warm season plants. Biennials and perennials, the best time to dig and divide is fall or early spring. A lot of times, like irises or daylilies, people will like to divide them right after they've flowered so they can remember what color they are. They maybe even tag them for, with the colors so that they'll move a certain color, certain place and things like that. But right now or early spring, either one is a good time to dig and divide those perennials. So when or what kind of plants we have containerized plants, and when we talk about trees, when we have that class, we'll talk about balled and burlapped trees and such like that. But a containerized perennial can be planted any time of the year as long as water is provided. I kind of disagree with that statement in that I don't recommend anything be planted in July, August, and even going into September. So July and August would be my 2 months that I say, no, you don't need to plant your grass seed. You don't need to plant trees because we're in the middle of one of our, usually in the middle of a drought. It's hot, it's dry. You're putting city water on those plants. They're not getting a lot of natural rainfall and they just don't transplant as successfully. So if you have to, your house, maybe you're building a house and it's ready and it's July and you've got to do something, so you may have to plant some things, when you're not supposed to. But anyway, those plants need to become established before experience either our harsh winter temperatures or our summer temperatures. You plant grass now. Yeah, grass is now. Kind of the rule of thumb is to get it out before October 15th. So before the end of October. So selecting plants. And I'll do a little plug. Tomorrow at noon, we're doing Wacky Wednesday, and we will be out at Mary's Garden, which is out by exit 11. And we're going to be talking, it'd be myself and the city forester, and we're going to be talking about selecting plants at the nurseries. So hopefully we won't make Mr. Beach too mad or anything, because we're going to be talking and we're going to be popping those plants out of their containers and looking at the roots and showing you all what to look for. So that is tomorrow from noon to 1, Mary's Gardens, Wacky Wednesday. So if you're available, come on out. We just tell people to bring their lunch and we'll do that on site.
Is it for 1 hour?
Yeah, it's just for an hour.
Can you use that hour towards your master gardening program?
Well, that'd really be a CEU. It's not, you're not volunteering.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it would work as a CEU for our certified master gardeners, but for those of you that are in your first year or interns, it would be a CEU.
Okay.
So when you're buying plants, of course, you want to check around with your local nurseries, your garden centers. You want to find a reputable nursery or garden center that you can work with. Find somebody that knows their plants, knows what they're doing, and that their crews know what they're doing. Their work crews know what they're doing. So you want to select those plants that are going to grow in harmony with each other or in the garden landscape conditions. So, yes.
What is the good one around here?
I cannot recommend one over the other. As an extension agent, I can't because I work with all of them. And so you just have to go to
I don't even know of two. That's Larry. And then there's another one.
Mary's Garden out by exit 11. Those are two of the bigger ones. There is Wolford's on Wilma Rudolph, and then Straight Line Fence out off of Dover Road does have plants too. I think they have more hardscape material, like your mulches, your rocks, and things like that.
There's just going past a straight line out on Woodlawn Road, there's a called the Garden Place.
The Garden Place.
A lot
Okay.
of trees.
The Garden Place. So, yeah. Yeah. The best way to start finding those places is just go to Google and just Google nurseries near Clarksville, Tennessee. And then Bates, yeah.
Right outside of Nashville.
Yeah.
On White Creek Pike.
Yeah.
Probably.
Plus Trenton has a lot of Mennonite,
Yes.
Amish nurseries.
Yes,
They're
up by
pretty-
Trenton, Kentucky, there's a lot of Mennonite or Amish nurseries up that way. There's also
They're
the
amazing.
auction. You may be buying, a bulk amount of plants if you go to the Fairview auction, but you'll be getting a really good deal on them. So, but yeah, if you're looking for something particular, just send me an email and I can send you some names of nurseries that I've worked with over the years. But like I said, I can't recommend one over the other. So.
What about Martin's Nursery? I think it's off of Ted Crozier.
I'm not.
And
Oh, Martin's
they-
Produce.
Yes,
Oh,
But
okay.
they-
Yeah, he just has seasonal vegetables.
but
He may
does
have
a lot of-
mums and things like that. But yeah,
Yes.
I think he goes up to the Fairview auction and buys those and resells them.
Okay.
So he's buying semi-local and reselling.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you want to select the plants that are uniform and balanced to the size of the container. You want to pull them off the shelf and look at them. Like if you're choosing, maybe you're looking at doing a row of boxwoods and you're going to be buying, 5 of them. Pull them off the shelf. I always pull them off and set them up next to each other and make sure that I get similar sizes to start out with. I want them to have a similar size and shape that I take home with me. And so I pull them off the shelf, set them out and take them and look at them. And then, if like I'm doing boxwoods, I may go over here and grab an andina or 2 and put it there, and I do my landscape design right in the middle of the garden center. Sometimes that's just how it happens. You see what you like and, say, okay, I know I'm dealing with a full sun environment. They've got this plant, they've got that plant, here I go, So sometimes that's the way it develops too, So. Yeah. Yeah. And on trees, I will take the packaging off and I will pop that sucker out of its container and look at it to make sure that it's not root bound. Now, that's some of the things I better leave for the tree class, but yeah, I do check into the plants. If you buy off the discount shelves, you watch them. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it could be a bad thing. I always quarantine those plants if I buy them off the discount rack, as you might be introducing a disease or an insect or some other type of problem into your landscape, because they're there and they're looking bad for a reason. And it may not, it may be because they weren't watered. It may be because they're overwatered. I've worked in nurseries. I've tried to teach people how to water. They just don't understand. You get the ones on the edge and the ones in the middle are dry, and then there's some plants that need more water than others. And watering it can be a tough job. It does take some skill. So, but that used to be my favorite thing to do at the nursery because I knew that's all I had to do all day was water. So I would start at one end with the trees and then I'd work my way up to where the customers were. And then, sometimes you'd have to start over again by about 2 o'clock, you'd be starting. Well, especially mums that dry out so quick and stuff like that. It's a full-time job, but yeah, that used to be one of my favorite days when I just had to water. Check with Lowe's, Home Depot. Yeah, check with your garden centers. That's, yeah. Yeah, I would too. I would.
Oh, they don't know where it is.
Yeah, they do periodically, but again, they need trained people. That's all I can say is they need to hire trained people to take care of those plants, and so anyway. So.
In charge of the floor department.
Yeah.
And I discovered that they're not always there.
Yeah, no,
They don't work for maybe part-time.
right.
So
Yeah.
everything that's sitting
And turnover's
outside-
high, there's a lot of reasons why, so. But you want to select plants that are uniform, balanced, that are healthy looking. If you have to, just softly kind of pull them out of that pot, check out the roots, make sure that they're not black and goopy looking, have a disease on them or something like that. You want the roots to be kind of whitish and healthy looking and not compacted or girdled, whether root bound. So if you see weak, elongated or floppy stems, that's a sign that the plant is growing too tightly in that container. And so it's probably root bound. Sometimes you can fix a root bound plant. I mean, by scoring the roots right before you plant them. Some of them have gone too far. If you see all roots and barely any soil and they're just really wrapped around tight, that plant's not going to be good. It's not going to fix itself in the landscape. It's going to continue to grow in a circle into the soil, and it'll last a few years and then it will die on you. So resist the temptation to choose the plants that has the most flowers, because that's going to be at the end of its flowering season. So you're wanting to put it in your yard for the flowers, but if it only blooms at a certain time of year and it's blooming at the nursery, it's not going to bloom for very long. So you may want to get the ones that are not blooming yet, put them out. They have a lot of, choose those that have a lot of healthy buds on them, and then you'll have more weeks of color. Like right now, I would say on the mums, try to stay away from the ones that are already blooming. Get the ones with the closed up blooms, and then that way, you're going to have several weeks that they're going to open up and you're going to have that showy color. So let's see. So again, healthy foliage, you want to select those with healthy foliage, good color, look for any insect damage, areas that are discolored, splits in the stem, maybe dark or rust colored spots on the trunk or the stem or on the leaves of the plant. Inspect the plant, well, insects, we just said that, as they could be hiding underneath the leaves. You got to really watch vegetables in the spring, because those plants are on those shelves and they're so close together and they're not getting that air circulation and they're not being properly cared for. And so it's very easy for, a white fly or an aphid infestation to just get out of control really quickly in a nursery situation. And so you don't want to buy that and bring it home with you. Okay, and if you do get them home and you find those insects, treat them with some insecticidal soap, spray them off. You can always wipe them off with a cotton swab and a little alcohol. If you catch them while they're small, it's easy to control. And then, like I said, check the roots, make sure that there's no diseases on the roots. Yeah. So. All right, you're going to inspect that root system. We've already talked about that. You can kind of press on the sides of the container and just loosen that and just kind of pull the container off just to make sure that you're seeing healthy roots. We've talked about the root bound. I got ahead of myself a while ago, I guess. Healthy roots are going to be a whitish color. They're not going to be darkened. They're not going to be kind of gooey or slimy. If you see that, stay away from it. And also make sure you go wash your hands, because you can spread diseases from one plant to another by getting it on your hands and moving it around. So on your actual planting date, it's best to plant on days that are cloudy or overcast, or maybe do it early in the morning or late in the evening. Planting at 1 or 2 o'clock during the day, that's the heat of the day. That's not going to be good. The plants are going to wilt up even if you water them, so if you can kind of, adjust your timing, and I know that can't always be done. If you're out on a landscape job, it's got to be planted. It's got to be planted. You water them and you move on. But if you can, try to plant when it's cloudy or overcast or natural shade. Make sure that you do water the plants before and after planting. While they're still in the pots, you want to make sure that they're watered and those roots are good and moist before you put them in the ground, and they'll transplant more successfully. Stay out of the beds as much as possible once you've got them tilled up and amended. I like to make the beds where you can reach across. Okay, I know with foundation planting, it'd be kind of hard, but you can also create paths or put mulch paths down to where you're stepping on the mulch or you're stepping on rocks while you're planting. Because every time you step in a bed, especially if it's a little wet, you're compacting the soil. And so you're destroying what you just tried to fix. So try to stay out of the beds. You do want to prepare the soil while it is dry, not while it's wet, or you'll have large clumps and there'll be caking and things like that that'll be going on. The plants should be planted at the same level that they were growing in their containers. And so sometimes I like to plant them a little deeper. Like if I get a 6-pack and it is kind of leggy a little bit, I'll plant them a little bit deeper and make sure that those roots are fully covered. And then something funny that happened at our Kleeman garden, at least the kids got a good laugh out of it, is after we planted and we watered, we went back in a couple days and those things had expanded and it actually popped back up out of the ground. We had to go back and push them all down because the soil, as it got wetted, it was peat moss, some other, whatever the potting mix was, it expanded and they just literally popped back up out of the soil. And so we watered them real good, put them back down in the soil. It's like, get back down in there. That's just to come out. So, but just, and watch the roots, make sure they're not root bound, and then water thoroughly. Don't always count on Mother Nature. I tell people that, and then we'll go have a planting event, like plant the campus red, or we'll do a tree planting and we won't water. Sometimes it's just not feasible to get a water truck in. But if you're doing your own home garden, make sure you water if you got access to it right there where you're planting. More of the landscapers should water in the plants when they're done, have access to water or a water truck. Their plantings would be more successful. Soil and water management. So you look at the water quality and you're looking at the soil quality both. So being a good steward in the environment means that you're putting less inputs into the soil or into our groundwater. So our soil, its function is to filter out a lot of the, to infiltrate and move and actually hold the water. That's going to be vital and important for plant survival. So, so you can use management steps to improve that soil water relations. And we talked about that. First thing was addressing drainage issues by using compost and other materials. You may have to build raised beds. Okay. You may have to use other techniques. So, but we want to keep our soil healthy and we want to make sure that we're not using a lot of inputs that are polluting our groundwater. Because ultimately, if you're putting on too much nitrogen or you're putting on too much phosphorus, that is going into the groundwater system, that's going into the creeks, the rivers, and things like that. So everybody is being affected by what you do in your yard. Okay, so we just have to be careful, try to make a healthy place for the plants to grow. And then it's going to require less pesticides to maintain those plants. And then we become good stewards of the environment. So over time, your mulch is going to break down, and that's going to increase those soil organisms, your good bacteria, fungi, worms, other little microorganisms that are in the soil. You want to encourage that habitat. Increased organic matter is going to increase the water holding capacity, and it also supplies some nutrients for plants. Really what it does is it makes the nutrients in the soil more available to the plants because it's loosening up that soil. The roots can get down in there, and so that when it rains or you irrigate, it's more easily uptaken by the plant. So, but over time, these practices can reduce the need for irrigation and fertilization because it's adding some nutrients. And you also want to prevent runoff to nearby waterways and streams. And at some point we may talk about rain gardens. I'm not sure. I don't think I had it in here. But rain gardens can be good. Basically, if you have an area where you've got an erosion issue, just start planting grasses and sedges. They've even got sedges, that are ornamental. Normally you think of sedge as a weed. We talked about that last week, but there are ornamental sedges, water loving plants that you can plant in an area where you've got an erosion problem, and that helps slow down the water and kind of hold it until it soaks into the soil and goes down into your groundwater system instead of just washing off and taking all your soil with it. So there's different, we do have some designs. If you go to that uthort.com I was telling you about and just search rain gardens, you'll find some good designs, and we've got the plants that are recommended for the rain gardens or swales, things like that. So I do not like the weed barrier fabric in any form. Plastic is definitely not recommended. Okay, unless we're talking about an annual plasticulture system where you're growing vegetables and that plastic has irrigation underneath it and it's taken up every year. But if you put plastic or you put the weed barrier down in your landscape, it actually inhibits the growth of the plants. We find that the trees, the roots try to grow to the surface because that material does not allow the water to get down through it as much as you think. Okay, so it's limiting its access to water, and so they're not getting deeply wetted, and so you'll see the roots coming up to the top instead of going down deep. And also, as the tree grows in diameter, gets bigger around, if you've got that tight plastic around it, it will actually choke out a tree. And I've seen this tons and tons of times in landscapes around. And so the first thing I'll do is I'll tell people, get your utility knife out and start cutting, because they're not the best choice for weed control because the weeds will grow on top. The wind will bring in a weed seed, the birds will drop them and things like that. And it's not going to keep Bermuda grass from growing into your beds at all. Yeah, Bermuda grass.
Easier to pull up.
Well, yeah, it does make it a little easier to pull up, but yes.
So like, if you put cardboard down on the bottom, you would, like, cut through all that?
I don't really cut through it. I let it break down. See, cardboard is going to break down and it's going to be composted organic matter over time. The weed barrier fabric never breaks down and plastic never breaks down. And so that's the difference there. Using the cardboard is kind of the lasagna method. You'll put cardboard and newspaper and you'll put some compost or soil and you do layers and layers and that breaks down over time. So, yeah. Okay. So the plastic or weed barrier fabric, it's going to prevent that water from getting down to the root system where it needs to be. The plants can also be stressed by the lack of oxygen because it actually, what water does get through, it holds it in. And if you've got a clay soil, and then it's going to hold that moisture in, and then you have a lack of oxygen. You have a lack of air movement within the soil, and we do need air movement through the soil. You wouldn't think that there was air down there, but there is air that goes through the soil also. And then the mulch, when it composes, it's gonna add to your organic matter. But if you've got mulch on top of the weed barrier fabric, your weed seeds, like I said, they're going to land on top of there and it really does no good whatsoever. So I would stay away from the weed barrier fabric unless you've got an area where you're just going to maybe put rock in and do containers on top or something like that. Maybe just, I don't even want to recommend it in areas where trees are planted. Because you see that the root system growing up instead of down. We've just seen too much of it to even recommend it anymore. So
Try to use it right up against the house
mm-hmm.
and put rock, because I don't want.
Yes, you can do that. That is one
I
method.
don't want.
Yeah, you don't want to put mulch up against your house. So what she was saying is, you're right.
But
Put
that, and it helps not wash out.
Right.
I had to have the leaf guard replaced that my father put in because the grid was totally packed. And the water come down and it would just come right over. You used to walk to the front door to come in and you got this shower coming down on you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But take home message is, plants are not going to survive without water. Yeah, I get calls on the trees, like when we had the 3 weeks during the summer where, we'd had rain, lots of rain early in spring. Okay, and then we went into where the faucet just got shut off. It's hot and dry for 3 or 4 weeks straight. I constantly get the reaction of, well, we had all this rain in the spring. Why would that be affecting my plant now? And I just tell people, well, go without water for a week. How would you feel? You'd probably be kind of light colored, maybe getting kind of weak and not standing up so well, you think about that. So I tell people you gotta hydrate yourself, you gotta hydrate those plants too. Because, even though we've had rain in the spring, we go for 3 weeks without any rain and you're not watering, then those plants are stressed. So you've got to be prepared to water during the drought periods. We'll emphasize this with the woody ornamentals, but if you've got new trees, trees are pretty expensive, or they can be. For the first 3 years, you're committing to watering throughout the dry periods with trees and other woody
What about-
ornamentals. So
I got a white oak that I nourished all winter in the basement. Under a grow light. And I put it out in the spring
mhm.
before I had my knee surgery, unfortunately. And it started busting out on the ends, and I was so excited, but we hit that long, deep, high heat. And it's just sitting there.
Yeah, as long as it's still alive, you're okay. Just keep it watered.
Well, I couldn't.
Oh, okay.
Just at the knee surgery.
Yes.
I even had my therapist go out and water it one day when he came.
Yeah.
But what about, what I thought to do, and then we started getting rain again, so then is 5-gallon bucket of
Mhm.
water.
Yeah.
Put like a garbage can liner on top to keep it from evaporating.
Mhm.
And then drill holes in the bottom and
Yes.
have a drip system on it.
Yeah.
Right next to the tree.
Yeah, a lot of people will do that, and there's other types of little donuts or bags that you can put next to your trees that you fill them up about once a week and let them slowly drip. Yeah. Yeah, we'll have that conversation when we have our tree class. Yes, ma'am.
The bottom says the ideal time to water is early in the morning. I thought the other guy said it was nighttime, like, or.
Well, Hebron and I disagree on a lot of things. Yeah, yeah, it's not Missouri. But early in the morning means like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes up and it gets hot. Because yes, if you're out there at 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning and you're watering and it's just getting hotter, your water is evaporating and going away. So he did have a point, but there are exceptions to the rule.
So they'll
Okay.
still get a pretty good benefit from a good soaking for the first 3 hours before the sun gets high.
Right. So a lot of people will set their irrigation systems to come on at 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning and run for a couple hours before daylight. And then they've got that water accessible to them. And
So what would your reason be for doing it at that time rather than like, say, 7 or 8 at night?
well, at 7 or 8 at night, it doesn't have time, well, especially if you get the foliage wet. Okay, we're going to encourage disease by watering that late at night. Now, 5 to 6 o'clock, 7, 5, 6, 7, when it's still staying light and you've got a breeze, and try to not get the foliage wet, just water at the roots and you'll be okay. But if you're going to be overhead watering, which we don't really recommend at all, that would need to be done in the early morning hours or something like that. So, and just remember, you're putting the water at the root system where it needs to go. So,
Ideally, do like a drip system.
a living
What
drip,
to do at night.
yeah, just a drip system of some sort will work. Yeah. But for insect control, I like to spray off my plants every now and then, especially the evergreen shrubs, because they get spider mites so easy. Your arborvitae, your juniper, just other evergreens, I'll give them a good hard spray with water about once a week. Even my vegetables, I'll go out there, maybe in the early evening, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, whenever, 5:30, whenever I can, if I ever get home from work, but I'll give them a little shower, I'll give them a bath, and literally be wiping insects off of them. It's kind of a stress technique too for me when I can go home and I'll baby my plants, Let's take off, yeah, that's where the weeds come in. I'll get rid of the weeds and then I'll give them a good hard spray and I'll be thinking about that person I'm mad at, Yeah, the plants be going like that when they see me coming. But our recommendations are 1 to 1.5 inches of water per week. Okay, that's hard to measure. So when you water, go back and check and make sure that you are thoroughly soaking the soil and getting it wetted down to about 6 inches, 6 to 8 inches because that's where your root system is. That's how deep your water needs to be going. So if you have to do that, maybe it takes you 30 minutes and you start seeing some water run off, turn your water off, let that soak in, then go back and leave it on for another 30 minutes. You may have to do it in increments, do some in the morning and some in the evening, just kind of goes by your schedule too. But if you get on a regular schedule, then you should only be watering about once a week, unless we're just having extremely high temperatures, a lot of wind and low humidity, because that just dries everything out. So thoroughly soak your plants, don't give them a sprinkle baptism. And but yeah, that ideal time would be, like between 5 and 7 in the morning.
I read also about, some of this is pretty accurate. Giving minute drinks of water creates lazy plants.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Just giving them a little bit of water, they are spoiled.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're watering them just a little bit every day and just getting that surface, yeah, your roots are going to grow up to the top. And then you decide to go on vacation for a week and you think your plants are going to be okay. Nope, you're going to come back and they're going to be dead because you got them spoiled. But so if you get to where you're thoroughly watering once a week, maybe twice a week during the hottest periods, then your plants should be a little bit tougher and be able to survive. Because we do want them to get a little bit hungry in between waterings. Or like I said, they get spoiled. They get spoiled and they get lazy. Yeah, right. Fertilizing, I like to go, start out with those soil test results. A lot of times you don't need to be adding a lot of excess fertilizers. Lime is generally important, depends on what the plant needs are and what the pH of your soil is. And the only way to accurately find that out is to send off a soil sample. But we like to boost our plants, and a lot of times we will use a Miracle Grow product or a Peter's product that is very high in phosphorus and potassium, lower in nitrogen. And that is good for your flowering plants. Now, if you want more leafy growth, then you're going to get something that's higher in nitrogen. Make sure you're watering after fertilizing. These fertilizers are made up of salts, especially your synthetic ones. And that's why I push the organic matter in the soil, so that those nutrients can be easily uptaken by the plants and you have less inputs, which means less fertilizer as well as other pesticides. So you may want to use like a bloom starter, like I said, a 5-12-12. We used to be able to find a 6-12-12. Can't really find that anymore. But you can use a water soluble or you can do a slow release. Something like Osmocote would be one brand name, and that would be slow release. It means it's pelleted, it's got layers on it. And so as you water or it rains and you're irrigating, those pellets are melting down. And so again, just read the label because it will tell you more than likely needs to be replaced in 30 days or 90 days, something like that. So it can give you a general idea of how long it takes for those pellets to break down.
I was going to ask you, I know how to increase the pH by adding lime.
Yes.
So what happens if you buy an acidic loving plant? How do you lower it?
Then you're going to add either urea or a sulfur mix. Like if you were growing blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, get that soil tested before you ever plant because you're going to have to incorporate some acidic amendments into the soil. So yeah, it's mainly sulfur. It could be copper sulfate. It can be urea. So that's how you acidify the soil. But a complete fertilizer has N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. As I said, if you get your soil test results back and it says you don't need any phosphorus, your phosphorus is high, then don't add it. Okay, you don't need it. Maybe you just need a little bit of nitrogen, maybe once a week, or put it on as the soil test recommends. But nitrogen leaches regularly from the soil, so there's just going to be a basic recommendation for nitrogen based on the plant type. So, and I like, there's fish emulsions, there's all types of different organic mixtures that you can use also. Yes.
Dumb question. I need to clean out my composter and I know I've got some really good soil in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Do I put that on? Do I save it to summer? Do I get my soil test first and then put it on in the spring?
How much do you have? I mean, is it a lot?
Probably not.
4 by 4 by a foot.
Okay, I would probably do your soil test first, pull your soil samples first before adding that to it, or it could make it be off
Yeah.
a little bit. So, yeah. And then, because it's gonna be high in nitrogen, but that's gonna burn up as it continues to break down even further. So you'll probably end up making kind of like a slurry. Maybe you run your hose in there and let it run out to do it like that. So. Okay, you guys ready for a break yet?
Yes.
Yes, okay. This is a good stopping point. I'm about halfway through. So let's take about a 10-minute break and then we'll come back together.
Yeah. Well, they love them to start. And now they're spread all over the neighborhood. They can't catch them. They've already had at least 2 rounds.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and they're also domestic, so they're not really wild.
They, you go there and we take off.
The best.
My dad raised rabbits and, I just wanted to take care of them a lot when I was in grade school the first time. And I love my rabbits. One they had,
Okay, I don't know what that sound was, but. Okay. Mute.
White butt stuck out. So I went to walk around and I did to 6 feet. She could charge. She grabbed the book and it looked like that.
Okay. Sorry, but I muted y'all on Zoom. We were getting some background noise here, so. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started and we'll get finished up tonight, 8 o'clock. I was hoping to get out early. Okay, pest management. Okay, choosing those species of plants and cultivars that are well suited for our environment here in Tennessee, as well as ones that have been bred for genetic resistance against some of the most common pests is going to be essential. So again, just doing your background, doing your homework on the plants that you select, looking at the list that we can provide through extension or, any other university, that does research. That's why we have research farms all across Tennessee. So we can say, hey, this plant does really well in East Tennessee, but it doesn't do well in West Tennessee, and it does moderately in Middle Tennessee, So we have three major research stations where they do research on trees and shrubs and plants. So that's how we can make the recommendations of what type of environment they need to survive in. But proper moisture, fertility management is going to further sustain their good health. I want to mention something about fertility. This just reminded me, and I may have told you last week that I had a person call in and they had just an average lot. You just think of an average lot. Well, he put like 6 40-pound bags of fertilizer out this spring and was wanting to know what do you need to put on this fall. And I was like, nothing. He's like, stop and do your soil test and see where we're at, because he probably wouldn't need anything but maybe a little nitrogen, because he burned up his lawn, going to need to overseed, so all kinds of problems. So fertilization management is very important. You don't want to put 6 40-pounds, over a 2,000 square foot landscape, so don't do things like that. Also, keeping your fertilizer and your pesticides, especially your herbicides, in the original container with the original label. Now, I also had another case, this has been years ago, where, the bags broke, whatever, they used white 5-gallon buckets. One had fertilizer, one had weed control. Lady thought she was grabbing the fertilizer and tossing it out. Well, she put the weed control that was meant for the lawn on her vegetable garden. So luckily she did call and we got a hold of the manufacturer. I talked to the soil lab. No, she could not grow anything in that area that she was going to eat for at least 2 years. And so did cover cropping, things like that, because that chemical was not labeled for edible products. So make sure, keep your original containers, or if you do, put them in a 5-gallon bucket with a lid, keep the label right on them what it is, but try to keep your original containers and use up what you buy within a year. As I know people say, well, the label's decayed. It's like, well, if the label's decayed and the bottle's kind of yuck, the product in it is probably not any good anymore. So you probably need to toss that and just buy some new rather than trying to use what you're not sure of. So
This waste management system of the county, they have a household waste pickup twice a year.
Yeah.
And they will take any chemicals like that.
Yes, you got to watch for those. The by county will do the hazardous chemical pickups. They have different sites across town, or I think you can take them out to the landfill, but it's just certain times a year that you can do that, like paint cans and old fertilizer or herbicide containers, things like that. So that's a good point. Let's see, scouting and watching for pests. Watch for those pests or those weeds, could be insects. Get rid of them while they're in a young stage before, they destroy your whole crop or your whole garden is, full of weeds. So keep those weeds from going to flower, but just scout and see what's going on. Check for insects, check for eggs, look on the underside of the leaves. If you see something, your plant kind of looks a little odd, maybe it's the leaves are mottled or maybe they're light colored, check them, see what's going on. If it's not an insect, it could be a nutrient problem, it could be a watering problem. So you've got to scout and kind of just go through your mind, what could be causing the problem here. And then if you're not sure, you call your extension agent. And then she says, well, it depends. So, but no, we would try to identify the problem and then make a recommendation, find out what's going on before you start spraying an insecticide or something like that on there, because it could be just a cultural issue. I know out here we've got the, is it the Japanese cryptomeria? Or no, it's not Japanese cryptomeria. What are those? The bushes out there. Laurels, yes, laurels. Okay. They get bacterial leaf spot on them every year. And it looks like insects are eating them up, but it's not. It's a bacterial disease. It kind of does its run. They look awful for a little while and then they start recovering from it. So it's not something that we even treat. You could treat it with a bactericide, but know what your pest is. You just have to kind of learn the plants and the common pest for that plant. And so you'll learn all these things in time. So let's see, but yeah, it may take a little time and patience to learn what's going on and to realize the right treatment, rather than just rushing out to spray something or put 40-pound bags of fertilizer on it to green up your yard. Mulch, I do like to use mulch. I like the fact that it breaks down and it adds organic matter. It does prevent a lot of weeds, but your weed seeds are brought in through the air, through birds. And so you're still going to have some weed pressure on top of that mulch. But if you stay on it, hand pick them, they're going to be easier to remove while they're small, and just, keep them removed. There are pre-emergent herbicides that are available. If you're a landscaper, and you're doing jobs for residential or commercial areas, you may need to use a pre-emergent herbicide that's going to keep those weed seeds from germinating, and keep that landscape looking really good. Your home, it's going to be your decision whether you want to do the exercise and get out there and pull the weeds, or if you want a little bit of help from a pre-emergent that's going to keep those weeds down. And also think about that seed bank that we talked about last week. If you're tilling up your soil, you're constantly bringing up new weed seeds. So if you can stay away from tillage and disturbing the soil, that's another reason why I like laying down the cardboard, because you're not really disturbing it. You're adding to it. You're adding to the soil. All herbicides, which would be weed killers, anything like that, make sure that you're reading and following the label directions. Make sure that you if it says wear gloves and a mask and long sleeves, you do that. They don't be out there spraying Roundup in shorts and flip-flops. Not a good idea. That stuff is absorbed through your skin. I'm not just picking on Roundup. I mean, any chemical.
Well,
It can be an insecticide, it could be a herbicide. It's all under that realm of pesticides, and you don't want to.
Would spray all her flower beds with it and then get out there and work it.
Right.
She just finished a year ago treatment for the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from it, and it was all over her body. She has a 50% chance of returning.
Right.
It's nasty.
Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
careful with it.
Yeah. They're connecting herbicides with a lot of health problems that have gone on for years. So, okay. So weed control tips, like I said, there are chemical weed control options. This is just one of your tools that you can use. And if used properly, they can be safe. If they're used off label or without the proper spray equipment on, they can be dangerous. Our nut sedge is one thing that's hard to get rid of just by hand pulling, that and your Bermuda grass. So nut sedge control, you could use a product called Basagran or Manage. Those are two different products. And if you got a really bad infestation, and then to kind of slow down Bermuda grass, nothing really kills Bermuda grass. It just slows it down a little bit. So you can get, it's called Grass Getter, Post, Grass Be Gone, this fluazepop, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, is the synthetic or the chemical name. It's called Ornamac Over the Top, and you can use it over the top of most ornamental plants to kill the grassy weeds underneath. So like if you had a boxwood shrub and you had a infestation of Bermuda grass, you could use Ornamac over the top and get a little bit on your shrub, and it's not going to hurt it. It's going to kill the grass. So that's the way its mode of action works. Now, if you have something like Roundup, glyphosate, it's going to kill anything green that it attaches itself to, because that's how it works. It has to attach to the green, the chlorophyll molecule, and work its way through the plant. Yes.
The grass be gone.
Mhm.
I think I have some. I think I've used that. Will it actually over time make the plant, the grass, weed, whatever, turn like a reddish color?
Unless that's just part of the dying process.
It took about 2 weeks.
Yeah. I could see it going through stages like that. I know
Just one
when,
day I walked out and it was
when
all
we
red.
get-
I was like,
well, I know when we see, when we had the drought, your grass would start turning purple and
Yeah.
then yellow and brown and dying out. So I could just see that as a kind of a stage of death,
right.
that it would turn the different
Yeah,
colors.
I sprayed it in some weedy spots in my driveway.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
happened to notice weeks later it was red.
Okay.
Strange.
That probably was just a reaction from the chemical.
Yeah.
Because, all your plants have the different hormones and the auxins in there that make them different colors. So that's, think about the leaves changing each year, the chlorophyll goes away and the other ones come in. So it's okay. So there are weed chemical options. Just a little bit about starting seeds indoors. You can easily start your seeds on these ribbed or flat trays. If I'm doing a lot of seeds, I won't try to put one in each hole. Most of the time, I will just sprinkle them out over, like if I'm doing a tray of tomatoes, I will sprinkle that over and then, dust a little bit more potting soil on the top and then push them down. Make sure they've got good firm contact with the soil. And you're going to start out with a soilless mix like Pro Mix or BMX. Those are just brand names. We've got Scott's, we've got Miracle Grow. There's all kinds of different potting mixes available. But you want to use a soilless mix, and that's lightweight. It makes it easier for the seeds to germinate. And then as they grow, once those seeds germinate and they get about 2 inches tall, they're going to be ready to transplant into bigger pots. And a lot of people skip the transplanting part because they will use either those little peat pots or they'll start them in 6-packs. But even if you use the 6-packs, you're going to have to move them to a bigger pot. Or what I do is if I've got them in 6-packs and they're about this tall and they start leaning over, I'll take a pencil and I'll just softly go down beside the plant, go all the way down to the bottom of that container, and then move the roots down into where the top 2 leaves are touching the top of the soil. And then keep it kind of loose around it and water from the bottom. I always do kind of a pot in a pot method. So like you'll have a tray underneath that tray that, has no holes in it. So you'll be pot in a pot. You put water in it and then let it soak up and pull up that water from below. If you're overhead watering, you're going to have disease problems, and those plants just are not strong enough yet to handle you pouring water over the top of them. And so they fall over and you have disease problems and things like that. So I like to set them, pot in a pot of water and maybe let them sit for like 30 minutes until they've soaked up that water really good, and then pull them off and let them dry out. Okay. And then it's going to be important to keep them under lights as they grow. Some people will just put them in their windows. I mean, that's okay if you're only growing a few plants, but if you're planning, to really get into this and start a lot of your own plants, you'll probably want to invest in some grow lights or maybe a little grow lab setup. You can buy fluorescent lights or grow lights fairly easily and make your own. But it is important that while these plants are growing, that you keep the light as close to them as possible. I don't know if you can see in that middle picture, but the lights you're able to move them up and down. And so what you want is the light as close to possible without touching them. And that's going to create a short, stocky plant. And then as they grow, if they start getting leggy, you can always pinch the tops out of them. So you take off that apical dominance. Remember, going back to botany, what's your apical dominance mean?
Terminal.
Okay, your terminal, yeah, your terminal growth is, that's your active growing point. So you pinch that off and it's gonna make the plant a little stockier, slow it down a little bit. But keep the lights on it as close as possible. And then be leery of the peat pots, because again, you do need to do that transplant process. Even if you're doing it right in the pot, just making sure that you tuck them back down in there. I need to bring an example sometime. But yeah, I mean, they get tall and leggy and you just need to gently push them back down in the soil. And I just learned how to do it with a pencil or a stick at some point and just make a little hole and push those roots down gently to the bottom. Yes.
So what would happen, for instance, we took like the site pot,
Mhm.
and when we put this much starting soil,
Mhm.
start.
Mhm. You could do that.
Add dirt to it.
Yes. Yeah.
And as it grows up, you can add some dirt. So it's-
Yes, that would work too. Okay, for those online, what she's saying is start out with just a little bit of soil in the pot, let that germinate, and then put more soil in the pot as it grows. So that will work. I've seen tomatoes grown like that in like 2-liter bottles, 2-liter soda bottles or whatever.
Oh, clear.
Yeah, clear bottles. Mhm. Or potatoes. I've never done potatoes in those, but yeah. Okay.
Isn't that gonna be bad for plants? Because like tomato plants can handle it because they
Mhm.
do whatever underground just turn the fruits.
Right.
But aren't some plants where if you bury them too deep?
Well, I mean, at this point, it's going to be okay because they're still developing. And, you don't want to keep it covered with soil. You want to make sure that it's still growing. If you see any signs of root rot or it looks, like it's got too much soil around it, then quit putting soil around it. You've probably reached its point. But yeah, some of it, you don't want to get them planted too deeply on some plants. But at this point, you're getting a lot of root growth down at the bottom and you want that to all fill out and create those short stocky plants. So I was going to say something else and I forgot. Maybe I'll think of it here in a minute.
How often are you watering?
Just as needed, as they dry out, because you do want to dry them, let them dry out in between watering, get a little bit hungry. You don't want them to wilt completely because, that's, at the wilting point is bad for the plant. But let that soil dry out completely and then water. Like I said, put it in a pot, let it soak for about 30 minutes, then pull them out. And so it just depends on the temperature, your air flow, things like that as to how often you're going to have to water.
One method we use at home is we use ice cubes.
Oh,
Just put an ice cube in one of those little things. It'll melt over time.
I guess that would work. But it didn't make the plants too cold?
No.
No. I guess if it melts fast enough, that would work. Okay, again, we talked about, water is definitely necessary for germination. That little seed, the roots are not going to start to form and come out until that seed takes in some water and germinates. So, but too much water is a problem and too little water is a problem. So, but we've discussed that a little bit. What's happened here in the middle of these trays is they're probably getting too much water and they're staying wetter there in the center. And so you might see some damping off, and that's a fungal disease that comes along. And they're just not growing well because they've got too much water. So like I said, you want to try to balance it out. You've got to watch your temperature, you've got to watch your airflow and things like that. You see how long it takes for them to dry out. But if you're having problems with damping off, the plants are rotting and falling over, the first thing I would do would be to back off on watering. Just back off, let them dry out in between waterings and let them get a little hungry. So, all right, a little bit on lighting or, oh, wait a minute. The temperature, you can buy these heat mats. They're really not that expensive. Depends on how much you're into starting your own plants, okay? How much you want to invest. I think you can get these things for like $20 or less a piece, and they're just a heat mat. And they are water resistant, because you're going to be watering these plants and such like that. So I've had people say, hey, oh, I used a heating pad, or, oh, I used an electric blanket. No. Water and electricity does not mix very well, So, if you don't want to buy a heat mat, set your flats on somewhere where it's naturally warm, maybe on top of the refrigerator or on top of the dryer, or, places like that around the house. And then, of course, as they get bigger, then you're going to start moving them outside and acclimating them for the outdoor world. But basically, your cool season plants need around a 60-degree temperature. Your warm season plants are going to like 80 degrees or more. Just, I guess, cool seasons like it cooler, warm season likes it warmer. Okay, Roy G. Bibb. So, or you could do the Dr. Seuss, and everybody know the rainbow song. No? I'm not gonna sing it. It's red, orange, yellow, green, followed by blue, indigo, and violet. I did have to halfway sing it. But Roy G. Bibb is just our light rays. The red and the blue have the most impact on plant growth. We can alter or kind of play with the plant growth. The green is the least effective out of the rays because it's just a reflection of the chlorophyll. But blue is going to increase vegetative growth, and red combined with blue encourages flowering. So in some of the bigger greenhouses, like where they're growing poinsettias and things like that, they will have where they totally black it out for a certain amount of time. And then they'll have either the blue lights if they want vegetative growth, or they can put blue and red when they want it to flower. And so you can manipulate your plants into flowering, like the poinsettias, the Christmas cactuses, and different things like that. But ultimately, it needs the full gamut of these rays of sun, but your red and blue are going to have the most impact on plant growth. And then your fluorescent bulbs are most commonly used, and they've got the red and the blue. Incandescent bulbs, you can't really find those anymore, but the incandescent bulbs give off too much heat, and they do not have the red and the green waves in it. You have to get that from a grow light or a fluorescent light. So we don't want to use the incandescent or the old type light bulbs. So once germination occurs, you just need to keep that light again close to the plants to prevent the stretching, so they're not searching for the light. And so there's a small system there that was probably just homemade, or you might be able to buy this kit, just something where you can move the lights up and down. At my old house, I had, it's kind of funny, I used an ironing board and some chains that were hooked to the ceiling, and the lights were hooked to the chains, and I could put them down and raise them up. But I put my plants out on a couple of ironing boards because I don't use them things. I finally found a use for an ironing board. I took the covers off and made a perfect thing to grow plants on. So, sometimes you just got to make do with what you have around the house. It worked. Oh, yes.
About full spectrum LED lights, do you recommend those for germinating seeds?
I'd have to check into them and make sure that they have the right amount of.
You gotta put them a lot higher.
A lot higher, than it's too
Okay.
intense.
Okay.
What about aquarium fluorescence?
Yeah, if they have the red and green, or the red and the blue waves, then they should be okay. I'd have to check into exactly what type of light you're speaking of. So yeah, they should be fine. Just a fluorescent over incandescent is what we're going to recommend. So, okay, humidity is not necessary for germination, but it helps to reduce the rate of evaporation. So usually that first week or so, while we're waiting for the plants, we will cover them up. Have a lid over the container. If you get condensation, just lift that lid up, let the condensation run off, and let those plants dry out a little bit, and then put the lid back on. Once they have germinated and they've gotten an inch or so tall, you can pretty much take that top off and leave it off. and just keep watering from the bottom like we talked about before.
I got
but if-
Herbaceous in the spring and I did a tray starting sunflower seeds.
Uh-huh.
Had them upstairs, covered them. They came up, took them downstairs, and were like in the ceiling. It was too far. But the problem I had was the mouse that lives in my basement. They
Oh.
kept digging them up. and
Yeah.
eating them.
Yeah, the mice will dig them up. Oh, goodness. Okay. All right. Extra seeds. Most seeds will store well. If you put them inside a canning jar, a Ziploc bag, or other sealed container. I like keeping mine in the freezer. All except for corn. You can kill the germ on corn, so you're better off just to keep it in a cool, dry place over winter, or just try to buy what you're going to use in 1 year.
Hot pepper seeds, I think, don't do well. I've heard hot pepper seeds don't do well in like the refrigerator.
Well, down in the refrigerator, they might germinate. That's the problem
No,
there.
like,
But if you put it in the freezer, that kind of puts them in a dormant state.
I had just heard that the hot pepper seeds specifically didn't freeze well, like it didn't take to cold well.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure. I've saved them like that before and used them. It
I know.
might reduce the germination rate. And the older the seeds are, the less germination that you're going to get. So like every year, and I keep waiting for the phone call. Usually we get a big donation of seeds, and then I can hand out all kinds of seeds to people. I haven't gotten that call, but they will be old seeds, and year after year, your germination rates will go down. Usually what it is, tell people just to test them. You can take a piece of paper towel, wet it down, and place about 10 seeds on that paper towel. Make sure it's wet, put it in a bag, set it somewhere warm, give it a couple days, and then see how many of those seeds have germinated. And then that way you know what percentage of seed out of that packet will germinate. So
I just pulled up my flower, baby sunflowers.
did you save the
yesterday.
seeds?
And, well, what the birds didn't eat.
Yeah.
But that's why I plant them partially is for the birds.
Yes.
But I pull them up and then I have one Ziploc bag with giant sunflower and one with a smaller, and they went immediately into the freezer.
All right. Okay. Oh yeah, vacuum sealer would, if you got one of those, that would work. Mhm. Yeah.
Where can you buy desiccants at?
Or you could buy desiccants. Boy, I'd probably Google it.
Like that's all-
I'd probably look
I've
online
seen
for it.
them.
I don't know,
I
in
didn't
this,
know if-
yeah.
What did-
Desiccants, like you put in the desiccants, like are in your vitamin bottles or sometimes in purses to keep moisture from building up. You can put those in there to help with the moisture too.
I'm wondering if
I-
you could use like damp red.
I don't know. I don't know what the
I
ingredient,
don't think they
if that's, yeah.
You buy it first.
You'd have to check the ingredients on
Check
it
the
first and see
Amazon.
what it is, but
Can't
but,
find it anywhere else. Amazon
I don't know.
has it.
I mean, I've saved the little desiccant things out of my vitamin bottles and stuff like that and used them in with my seeds to reduce the moisture. So you can reuse them, but I've always reused them out of edible things. So I don't know if you could take a desiccant that's in a leather purse and use it on an edible seed. I think there might be some conflicts there. So, but okay, let's keep moving. Bulbs and bulb-like plants are perennials also, and of course they have a period of growth followed by a period of dormancy. So the bulbs that we plant in the fall are going to be spring blooming bulbs, and the bulbs we plant in the spring are going to be summer blooming bulbs. So right now, if you want daffodils, hyacinths, things like that, you're going to be planting them now. Okay. Internet's unstable. Okay. But these plants, can endure the unfavorable conditions. They do like kind of a well-drained soil. So what we find with like tulips will tend to rot in a couple years. So they're not long-lived. I mean, you may only get a couple of years out of your tulips. They either rot in the ground or the chipmunks get them or the squirrels get them and things like that. Squirrels and stuff don't seem to mind the daffodils as bad. They don't eat those. But tulip bulbs, they love them. They'll just pick them up and run off with them. So,
I
yeah.
haven't used them before, but I have them to use now. For a cage, that you put tulips in.
Yes, I've heard
Put
of
it
that.
all,
Yeah.
because my squirrels eat everything.
Yes, there's plenty of critters out there that like our plants. So, but just different types of storage organs on the plants. We have bulbs, we have corms, we have rhizomes, and we have tubers. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but just know that there are those different kinds. And your planting depth is going to be based on, what type of storage structure is there. Okay, we're going to look at the slide here in a minute. You can supplement your soils with a 1:2 to 1 ratio fertilizer, unless your soil test says you don't need any phosphorus. But you can put some bone meal. A lot of people will just sprinkle bone meal in where they plant the bulbs. That's phosphorus. And so that helps them with their getting their roots established, and then with the flowering later on. Okay, after they flower in the spring, allow that foliage to die back naturally, okay? And when it gets all brown and unsightly, then go ahead and mow them back. If you take them and you tie them up, I've seen people take like string and rubber bands and just tie them up because they don't want to look at them. Well, you're cutting off this photosynthesis process there. And so that foliage needs to be allowed to die back naturally, because it's taking all those sugars and then nutrients and it's putting it down in the bulb. Okay. And so, but as soon as they turn brown and, kind of yucky looking, yeah, cut them down, cut them back, but give them time to make up some food for the next year. We can dig, dry, and store tender bulbs, the gladiolus, dahlias, and tuberous begonias. Now, those usually are kind of costly. I mean, gladiolas maybe not, but some of your dahlias and the tuberous begonias can be pretty pricey. And so you will probably want to dig and dry those. And, like right now, you're going to want to dig them up and dry them, cure them out, and then plant them back after, like in April, mid-April or May. So those are what we call tender bulbs, and they would not withstand a freeze. If the soil freezes, those bulbs are going to freeze and they're going to die. So it's not like an elephant ear that would probably be able to resist that freeze, and they'd still be okay. The gladiolus, I don't dig up. I did in Missouri, but I don't dig those here. But the dahlias and tuberous begonias, I would definitely dig up. And
Did you store them in dirt?
okay, we're gonna look at that. No, you don't want to soil it. No. Well, first of all, when you dig, you want to dig carefully and try to make sure that you don't cut into the plants. If you do cut into the plants, either just bury that bulb back or toss it. You don't want to put it in where you're storing the other ones, because one bad apple ruins the whole basket. Same thing with bulbs. If you've got one in there with the disease, it's going to spread it to the rest. So you want to gently dig, and we use a digging fork, and you just kind of push that fork into the ground underneath the bulbs and try to pop them up out of the ground. And so hopefully, you do this when your soil is workable, maybe a little damp. You can wash them off when you're done, but usually I like to have some type of a tray set up, or maybe a table with just a screen on it, and put those bulbs on that screen. Not a solid table, something with a screen on it, so they can dry out. I usually don't wash them. I just let the dirt dry and then just kind of shake it off before I would put them in storage. And so you're going to leave them on a tray. They're curing. Curing is going to depend on the temperatures. Okay, it depends on the plant itself, but it's kind of like an onion. You're going to take it and you're going to let that plant cure till it's kind of brown on the outside, and then you're going to store it. There are products that you can use, insecticides or fungicides that you can put on there that will keep it from the diseases from becoming a problem. But thought I had more, but with when you're storing your bulbs, you're gonna use like a sawdust material or maybe cardboard or paper sacks, things of that nature. You don't want to put them in soil to store them because they're gonna start growing again, or they might rot if that soil is damp. So you can put them in paper bags, label them, put them in a dry area where they're not getting any light, because if they're getting light, they will start to grow and to bloom. Because you can force bulbs to bloom. If you start about 6 weeks ahead of time, a lot of people will start in 6 weeks before Easter and force bulbs to come up. Or you can even force them right before Christmas and start in 6 to 8 weeks before Christmas, and you can have blooms for your table. But we can talk about that at another time. So close here. Okay, spring flowering bulbs. As we discussed, tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, crocuses, the bulbous iris. Basically, you're going to prepare your soil, and then you're going to plant them 2 times as deep as the diameter of the bulb. So if you have a 1-inch bulb, how deep are you going to plant it? 2 inches. So if you have a 2-inch bulb, how deep? Okay, so it's simple as that. So you just measure the size, and there's your planting depth. The irises, of course, like to be right on the surface. They don't like to be buried. If you bury them too deep, you'll have less flowering, and you'll probably end up with borers. There's an iris borer that gets into them, it just goes through the tuber and it kills the plant. So bearded irises, tubers, begonias, the anemones, crocus, those things are going to be fairly close to the surface. They don't like to be buried that deeply. But your daffodils, they like being down there deep. Tulips, they like being down pretty deep too. So. And then, of course, again, you can have plants that bulbs that are going to bloom from early spring to mid-spring, to late spring. So you just check on the labels, see when they're supposed to bloom, try to keep a continuance going in the landscape. And then, of course, summer and fall flowering bulbs, these are ones that would not withstand the winter. So you're going to plant them in the spring, maybe in May. So your gladiola, lilies, dahlias, your tuberous begonias, your calla lilies, you're going to plant those all in the spring, and then they'll have summer or fall blooms. Okay, again, that looks like the same chart. Okay, common problems and stresses. Even with the best of care, we're going to see problems arise in plants. You're going to have things, when we have wet weather, you're going to have more slugs, you're going to have more snails. We've seen worms on cabbage were really bad this year. I mean, sometimes it's in phases, sometimes it's cyclical, and so you're always going to have something. And that's why going around scouting, doing your IPM, watching those plants, seeing what's going on, identify the problem before you try to treat it. So we've talked about, too much or too little light, too much or too little water, overcrowding, poor nutrition, poor soil. All those things can cause problems and stresses to the plant. So we can decrease the stress by properly preparing the soil, purchasing healthy plants, using the correct spacing or recommended spacing, providing the adequate water, adequate or sufficient water. So when it comes down to selecting the appropriate plants, what you want to do is to reduce your inputs. You want something that looks pretty aesthetically, but you want to be good to the environment too. And so that just all goes back to preparing the soil, selecting those plants that grow in this area. But you want to landscape to reduce or prevent pollution. So your rain gardens, if you've got erosion going on, you can always plant a rain garden rather than just throwing rocks out there. So you've got something live out there that's soaking up some of that water. It's slowing it down. It's keeping it in the system. You want to conserve your natural resources, and by plant selection, there'll just be some that are naturally drought resistant, so you don't have to water all the time. You can group plants together, water loving plants. If you've got some, that are going to need more water than others, group them together. So this area of the landscape, I've got to water more often than maybe over here. So, and then, we want our landscapes to be attractive. But all this, we want to be good stewards of the environment. Garden maintenance is very necessary. You can't just put it out there and expect it to grow without any care, unless you're just going to put out plastic flowers. And then you're still going to have weeds grow in between those plastic flowers. So, but most plants are going to benefit from cutting back or pinching, deadheading, dividing, as well as weeding and edging. Does everybody know what I mean about pinching or deadheading? Okay, you're just pinching the dead blooms off. A lot of plants will continue to flower. You just have to remove the blooms or cut them back a little bit. So that's what that means. Okay. We've already gone over a lot of this. Edging, I think it helps with the Bermuda grass. We were talking about that earlier. If you make a good edge, it just defines the shape of your garden, but it kind of puts a stopping point, to where you can go along the edge with your weed eater and hit that Bermuda grass and keep it out of your beds. So it actually cuts into the soil and makes an edge around your landscape. You can, don't forget about your hardscape material. There's a lot, the bigger rocks and just lots of different things, masonry stones, water features, things like that that you can include in the landscape. And this, I love this picture because I love that reduced turf area. That could be my garden. It'd probably be AstroTurf. So just quickly, container gardening, if you don't have a large place to garden or you can't get around much, you can't get out and take care of a big garden, use the containers. There's a lot of different types of containers. I love the little the pots that go on your deck, and they've got I don't even know how to describe it. I'm running out of words today, but you set it on your deck and it kind of hooks to that top fence. Yeah, fits to the top rail, so you can have your gardens right there at the height where you can reach them. And so that makes it easier to garden. You can grow a lot of vegetables, especially leafy vegetables, maybe some of your smaller like patio tomatoes or patio peppers. Just choose those that are dwarf or container type plants. But your containers you can change out from year to year or from season to season. Like you might want to start out with pansies and stuff like that. And then as it warms up, you're going to add some summer type plants. And then in the winter, you're going to go back with that. And you can even do winter baskets. There's just some pictures there of containers. Using old guttering systems. We have a lot of people that will do that. Vertical gardening, going up, because if you don't have the space or you don't have the soil. Spillers, fillers, and thrillers is what we say on the container plants. You want something that spreads or cascades, but you want something tall. That can add height, and then filler plants are just gonna, just what they said, the filler plants are gonna fill in everything else. So, but you can mix your annuals and perennials together. Even shrubs, like around Christmas, you may get an evergreen and change out, if you've got big pots sitting on your porch, you could put those evergreens in there, maybe put some flowers around them, and then, change that out, go ahead and plant that tree in your landscape and put something else in the pot. But containers should be strong enough to hold the growing media and a mature plant. They are going to be heavy to move, so you may have to have, some way of moving them. Like I said, I like the things that you put underneath them and they got wheels on them. So, but the clay pots. Yeah.
There'll be suction cups that
Yeah.
goes back to, I got one to move.
Mhm.
A ficus somebody gave me for Christmas years ago, it was like this.
Uh-huh.
I've already had to prune it, top it out twice to get it in the basement.
Oh my goodness. Goodness. Okay, we'll just skip that. Okay. Basically you're using that soilless mix. We talked about that a little bit before. You want to make sure that you are watering where it's getting water all the way through the plant. And so like when you have your container plants, I like to water them until the water runs out the bottom, and you usually have a base pot, and I will let that run through. Again, let it set about 30 minutes and then dump the excess water off so that you're not, building up, because you'll have white flies and gnats and other bugs that have built up and you'll overwater them. So you don't want them to sit in that water continually, but you want to make sure that that entire pot gets soaked, and so that the root zone, the roots can grow all the way down to the bottom of the pot. So whatever you're using for a pot, make sure that it's got holes in the bottom. Okay, all right. Questions? I'm looking at the questions. All right, let me see if we've got anything on here. Okay, anything in the chat? Okay, I think we just got people checking in. Did any of y'all have any questions? Our Zoom people? Nope, we're all good. Okay.
No, I'm good, thank you. No, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Can't hardly hear. Okay, we're gonna end the meeting. We'll see y'all next week then.